Hello, anybody there?
Hi, okay, yes, I'm here. I'm just trying to sort out
Hello,
the.
hello.
Hi, can you hear me?
Hello? Hello, hello? Asipe, are you there?
Hi, yes, Prof, I can hear you. Are you able to hear me from your side? Chipo, can you hear me? Hi, Chipo.
Hi, Asipe. Sorry, I I was on mute. How are you?
Can you hear me? Hi, I'm good, and how are you?
I'm doing okay.
I think there might be a problem with Prof's audio. Let me just go to her and find out quickly. I'll be here in 2 minutes. Should anyone
All right,
come in, please let them know that we're going to be starting soon. Thank you very much.
all right, it's fine.
Asipe, are you there? Hello? Yes?
I can hear you from my side,
Yes.
but you can hear me? No. No. We just had a conversation with one of the participants. You didn't hear her as well.
No, I didn't, but let me check my settings. Sound. MacBook output, input. Oh, should be okay. Let's try again. Do you want to go over? Okay, let's try again. But you can hear me.
Yes.
And can you also see me?
Yes, I can hear you. I can see you as well.
Okay, let's try again.
I'll try and say something again.
Okay, please. Oh, I can hear something.
You can hear me? Okay, perfect.
Yes, I could just hear your footsteps.
No,
So we're
that
all
is,
good?
yes, we're going to be starting soon.
All right. And how is my video? Is good?
Yes, your video is clear.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
I guess we'll wait a few more minutes.
Yes, just a few more minutes, and then I'll come in and introduce you. So
Okay.
for now, you can switch off the video and then
Yep.
switch on when you come in.
Radio. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us again as we host a seminar on learning from failure in doctoral. Who is a visiting professor at the Center for Postgraduate Studies at Rhodes University. Professor Elke is an experienced educator and researcher with international work and research experience. She is an applied linguistics who brings expertise to solving language-related problems in contexts such as postgraduate supervision and assessment practice, language education, and cross-cultural curriculum development. She has conducted doctoral research in theory and practice over the last 2 decades and combines her research on improving feedback and assessment practices in doctoral supervision with developing and running professional development workshops for research students and supervisors. Professor Stracke's current research focus is on exploring failure in doctoral learning at the University of Canberra, and she is also engaged in researcher development across all stages of her research career. She is the president of the Australian Linguistics Association of Australia, providing leadership in applied linguistics and supporting the development of teaching, learning, and research in the field. Well, as the Rhodes University community, we are so delighted and we are so blessed that you chose our university to offer such a great seminar. I know we're going to be having you around for the next 2 weeks, and there's another workshop that you will be delivering next week, which we will talk about on the chats, and also for everyone to know the date and the time. Colleagues, without wasting any time, allow me to introduce our visiting professor, Elke Stracke. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Sipe, for your kind words. I'm also very delighted to be here today. I only arrived in Makanda, Grahamstown yesterday, and I've already feel a little bit, actually quite at home at the university. I had a wonderful warm welcome in the morning, and I've already met so many lovely people. Before we get started, I'd like to thank a few people who have already done a lot for me, and delighted to see that Siu has joined us today. So Siu, thank you so much for hosting me, and I look very much to hopefully seeing you next week. I would also thank Mandy, who hosted today the tea for me while Siu is still away. Thank you very much for your warm hospitality. Asip, of course, for your warm welcome today, but also for making my arrival in Makanda a relatively easy process. And last but not least, I would also like to thank Kirsten. She is there because she graciously allowed me to use her office this afternoon so that I wouldn't get into problems because of the load shedding. So thank you to you and to everyone this afternoon for making time for me. And as Asipa told you, I'm a bit of a hybrid. So my home discipline is applied linguistics, TESOL, which sits at the interface of education and also the humanities. That's one of my areas. And then over the last 15, 20 years, I have developed a strong research interest in doctoral education. And now I'm moving more into general research or development at my university. I guess that's what we do over a career. Today, I would like to focus on my latest passion, if not obsession, and that is failure. What I want to talk about is really a project that is in the making as we speak. And I'd like to, because I'd like this project and my research there to be international, I'm really keen to share my thoughts, early thoughts, maybe, and to hear what you think about the topic and how we conceptualize the construct of failure in research and in particular in doctoral education. Let me now get started and share my screen. Oh, there we go. Shouldn't be. I'm missing, thank you. I'm missing sharing just my PowerPoint. Maybe advanced. Nope. I see. How is this? Can you see my screen? Yeah, that looks good. Okay, great. Here we go. So first of all, no need to take any notes. Very happy to send you a PDF of my presentation today. And before we get started, I'd like to really acknowledge my colleagues. And I will get back to them during my talk, because the project that I'll be talking about is very much a collaborative project, which I'm leading, but in very close collaboration with my colleague, Alison Holbrook at Newcastle Uni, Australia, Professor Jen Webb at Canberra Uni, Rachel Burke at Newcastle, and also Associate Professor Vijay Kumar at the University of Otago. And thanks, Asipa, for mentioning my second workshop, which will be more workshopy and also face-to-face and a bit longer next week. That'll focus on feedback, and that is also, again, collaborative research, in particular with Professor Vijay at Otago. All right, let's get started. Now, before I start about, where we are coming from in terms of theory and why we think, why talking about failure in research and in particular in doctoral education is important, I was hoping to maybe get a few voices from you, if you are willing to share a real research failure. Now, I'm not quite sure how many doctoral students we have today, how many staff we have. We might also have participants who actually are in both roles as student and staff are doing their PhD. I'd like you to think about a situation where you think you had a real research failure, and then also maybe share why you think that was a failure and tell that story. Ideally, you might want to share what you have learned from that. Now, I can't see the chat right now, but I'm trying. Can't see that. You might also wish to write a couple of things into the chat. Now, I'd just like to share one story with you myself, and that maybe encourages you to also talk about a real research failure that you have experienced in the past. But with real, I mean not something that you might fear might happen to you, but really that happened to you. So it's a question that I know takes people by surprise, because talking about failure is very difficult, which is actually also a challenge for our research project. We like to talk about our successes. We don't necessarily like to talk about failure, even though I think things are changing a little bit. So I'll share just one research failure with you this afternoon. But I can assure you there were many over the decades of my career. So I'll tell you about a research failure that I experienced when I moved from Germany, which is my home country. You might have picked up my accent. I moved to first to New Zealand and now to Australia more than 20 years ago. And I was kind of probably middle career researcher in Germany. I was quite established. I had published, never had big issues with publications. So I moved to Australia or New Zealand first, and I wanted to publish my work now in an English-speaking journal. So I wrote up my work and sent it in. And I must say, in Germany, we don't have this peer review system that is now, that was already common at the time in New Zealand, Australia. Anyway, I sent my paper in to an Australian applied linguistics journal. I got it back and I just couldn't believe it. I felt like an utter failure. I didn't even get a full reject. I got a revise and resubmit, which is not, the worst assessment. But I felt, to me, it was utter failure, because I just didn't expect that my work would be sent back to me for revisions and further work. So as I said, I had just moved to the Southern Hemisphere. So getting this assessment from the reviewers of the journal came as a shock to me. At that moment in time, I started wondering, have I done the right thing? If I don't get my work published here, if I cannot write, what am I doing here? So it was a big shock to the system. However, as we do, of course, after a few weeks, we addressed the comments, and because it was a revise and we submit, I could actually save it, and the paper was published. And what have I learned from that? I have learned, well, that different contexts require different skills. And while I thought I had the skills for the new academic context, I did not have the writing skills. I was not familiar with how to write an article in English, with the structure that it comes with, that I now teach to my students at the time. And I also learned that you don't give up. You keep that paper circulating until you improve it, until it gets published. And it paid off. Funnily enough, that paper is my most cited paper today, which is a bit ironic, but maybe because I worked so hard on it. Okay, that is my story. So you can see what I experienced as initial failure, and that was a shock to me at the time, turned out to be quite a learning experience, which helped me a lot in my development as an academic over years. Now, do we have anyone who would like to share maybe a short story of their research failure before we go further? Do we have anyone in the chat, Asipe, who would like to share, or maybe even better, just raise your hand, and Asipe will give you the voice. Oh, I have someone. We have one comment in the chat. Is that Asipe? Is that you?
Yes, that's me.
Yes, that is your story.
Yes, it is. It is. Should I share?
Yes, please talk a little bit about it. Thank you very much for being the icebreaker.
Okay, so in 2019, towards the end of the year, which was year 2 of my master's, I submitted my master's because my supervisor and I thought, okay, this document is done. And before then, I used to hear quite a lot about the final stage of a master's is just submitting it, and then it's a given, you're gonna graduate, you are done, you are finished. In March 2020, close to actually the time the COVID-19 hit, I received an email from the committee saying that I needed to resubmit and re-register because one examiner just couldn't give me any mark, and the other one gave me a good mark. So they decided I must resubmit. Because I've never heard of a resubmission, and at that time I was preparing for my PhD journey at Rhodes, I panicked, emotions got the better of me. I thought I was a failure, and it took me quite a lot of work to actually get to the intellectual confidence that I have now because of that experience. So one thing that assisted me to understand what this meant was actually an email which I sent to Sue McKenna, telling them, you know what, I can't come to Rhodes anymore because obviously I'm not as intellectual as I thought I was. But she wrote me back a beautiful message telling me what a resubmission meant, and also told me that Rhodes will wait for me, it will be here, and that eventually I will learn that this experience has actually been preparing me to become a great academic. And she gave me some examples of resubmissions and how those beautiful stories have turned out to be. So I then did the resubmission in 4 months, submitted it 2 weeks before giving birth, and continued with my PhD journey. And I'm glad that I never ever let that setback actually define what type of an academic I'm destined to be and how great of an intellectual contributor I am in the field. So thank you very much.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Asipe. What did you learn in the hindsight?
So the most key important thing that I learned is that firstly, in the academic space is a slow cooker, and the work that you do, you really need to read in terms of how to do research, but also understanding that the research process in itself is an ongoing thing. There's gonna be shortfalls, there's gonna be issues that actually really show you rock bottom actually has a basement. But it's also a training in the academic space. And if you want something, you're going to get up and go for it, no matter how many times you fall. So that fall for me was the most hardest. And I believe there's no other fall that can actually get me to that point because I've dealt with that. So it has gave me strength and resilience and also trust and confidence in myself.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing, Asipe. It's not easy to talk about this because, yeah, anyway, do we have anyone else who would like to share a story? I can't see all of you. Any raised hands? It could be a small story, it could be a big story. Both stories, Asipe and my story, was about the assessment of our academic work. Okay, not for now, that's fine. I know that it's hard to talk about failure and it needs confidence to actually share failure. But we have a comment from Sue here. Oh, that takes us to a different context. I just scan quickly through Sue. Sue, are you actually on audio? Do you want to talk against this, or shall we just?
Sure, I'll just quickly talk to it, and just because it starts off with the story of sounds like a big success. I have put together a big funding proposal with a couple of colleagues. As always, you're working to a very tight deadline, and we had to include some representatives from other universities. So quickly asked people, will they be involved? Yes, they were all happy to be involved. They all signed the memorandum of understanding. We send off the bid. We get this huge amount of funding from the EU. Yay, this is a big success story. Wonderful. There are news stories about us getting this big grant. Then we called together all these people that had signed the MOUs, and it was very clear that there was absolutely no agreement about what this project was about. In fact, there was a lot of anger, people saying that we'd framed the project inappropriately. We had accusations of misleading people. I've never felt like such a failure in all my academic life. It was very, very, very scary. But we got through it, and it ended up being a great project. But in those few moments, in fact, it was over the course of a couple of days, I can remember thinking, I have messed up big time. I'm not going to recover from this mistake. And as I say in the brackets at the end, like you were saying, Elke, I can share lots and lots of rejection stories about, grants being rejected and papers being rejected. Oh, yes. But that's just another example where I felt like it was a real sense of failure that I hadn't managed to bring cohesion with a group of people.
Yes, thanks a lot for sharing, Sio. This maybe is of interest also for younger scholars, that the failures can keep on coming, even though you move on in your career and you become, more established researcher. And maybe the rejection stories of articles get less because you learn how to do that. But there's very many other challenging situations where you might fail, or at least you think you fail at least for a little bit of time. And we have another comment from Melvin. Basically, you want to talk to this, Melvin? Basically, you say your initial idea was kind of not dismissed, but you had to prove your case. That's interesting. And may I assume, Melvin, that this is what you did? Did you come back and defend?
Yes. Eventually, eventually that's what I did. The concept that I had, and eventually the research that I did, I intended to look at language use in a medical setting.
I think I've lost Melvin. How about others?
And specifically, I was looking at how men report reproductive health problems in a reproductive health clinic. And so when I came with that concept to the department, you know, I'm a language student, discourse analysis, and here you are trying to say that you want to go and do research in the hospital. And everyone told me that I'm not a medic, I have no any medical background. And so there's no way I can get into the hospital because of issues of hypocritical oath, ethics and confidentiality. And so that day, the verdict was that I go and think about it. If I am so sure that I can do that research, then I come back and convince the entire panel. And if not, then I just forget about it entirely. I was so scared. For about 3 days, I couldn't think until I saw, I remembered some professor I had met in earlier before during my undergraduate who had done something to do with health communication. And they were 11 hours away. So I took a bus and went and talked to him, came back, hit the ground running, and I got my facts. And guess what? That is the research I did for my PhD. I went back and convinced them.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, what a story. I'm glad that you persevered. And yes, Theo mentions that there is a lot of gatekeeping in academia. And I think in your story, I can see the gatekeeping is also, I guess, between disciplines. You know, we talk a lot about interdisciplinary work, and in a lot of contexts, it's being encouraged. But interdisciplinarity can only happen with a lot of respect and openness to how people in other disciplines do research or, you know, see the world. So that's a big topic too. Okay, thank you so much for sharing these stories. And let me now move on with my talk so that you get an idea why I'm actually interested in this. So this is the short outline there. And you can see that in our actually multidisciplinary team, we look at failure from different angles. And this is like the foundation or theoretical foundation for the work that we are doing and hopefully also will do at large scale in the future. So why do we want to talk about failure in doctoral education? And Asipa's story was actually as if it was made for this seminar. So first of all, data for non-successful thesis in initial doctoral examination, in your case, Asipa, it was master's, but doesn't really matter. So first of all, we've done a bit of desktop research. We do not find comprehensive data on non-successful thesis at the point of initial doctoral examination. We do know there is a lot of research on doctoral students and dropout during candidature, but what actually happens? What are the numbers for accept with minor revisions, revise and resubmit, or even reject at that level? Having said that, we do know that failure happens because in our little team, and like for the universities that I have worked with over the time, I do know that these things happen. PhD students can fail at the initial doctoral examination point, which means that the overall assessment of their thesis is a kind of a resubmit, or it's usually a resubmit. This comes, I'm not sure about how things work here in our context in South Africa, but if you get a resubmit in the Australian or New Zealand context, you need to re-enroll for at least another 6 months, can be longer, depends on the final verdict of this Deputy Vice Chancellor research. And that, of course, comes with considerable cost. Imagine you're an international student, another 6 months of study in Australia, it's easy 10, 12,000 Australian dollars. That is huge and often not outside the student's reach. But also, let's not forget the emotional cost, which is not very much talked about. We've just heard the stories of failure in the context of our stories. And there was always a moment, because I'm a linguist too, one could probably analyze our stories. It looks as if there were always 2-3 days, sometimes even longer, a phase of utter despair where you really start doubting about your skills and abilities, etc., before you pick up again. So what about those costs, and what traces do they leave? We don't know that. What we do know is that according to Stan Taylor 2021, he wrote in 2021 that there are roughly 13 million doctoral students worldwide, and we have 50,000 in Australia. So if you only take a failure rate, talking about resubmit, because full rejects are very, very rare in doctoral examination. If you just take the 6% that have been mentioned in other research or 10% of resubmit thesis, it is a huge number if you look at it worldwide in the global context. It's also a big number if I look at the Australian context, which of course I do, given that I work in Australia. So there are costs, financially, emotional, and at the same time, we don't really know how people cope with such a situation when there is a resubmit in doctoral initial examination. How do they engage? In our project, we actually also extending the notion of failure also to those verdicts where you get a revise and resubmit, which is not at a lower level in our assessment system, because the feelings that comes with that on the part of the student or candidate and the supervisor is also a feeling of failure. I guess at the beginning, when we start becoming an academic, when we get those revise and resubmit, we've experienced it as failure, even though it's not failure, but it's something that you feel at this moment in time. So we believe that there is a need to have a look at this in a little bit more depth. And these are the lenses of failure that we are looking at. And I'd like to step you through them now, one by one, and also bring in my colleagues so that you get a bit of a feel who does what in our team. So I introduced Professor Alison Holbrook to you, that some of you will probably very well know. She is very fascinated by understanding failure in the context of the research on emotions in doctoral education. And I'd start here with a quotation from an interview that she and her team did as part of an ARC discovery project. And just read through the quotation now. And this is what the candidate said, looking back at her doctoral candidature. So to me, in particular, the very first sentence, so this is when the student reflects on her candidature. It's like being locked in a dark room that contains a ton of building blocks. And you're told you won't be let out until you have built what the blocks are meant to build. The image of the dark room is, to me, it's worrying. Research should not be about sitting in a dark room, being locked in a dark room. We would like to think of research as something that empowers us and encourages us, and we should be looking at the sky and all around us to find out what's happening. But this is what this student experienced in her candidature, not at examination point. So it's an example, it's a quote that brings out the emotions that, you know, come with being a student, a doctoral student in this case. And we know that emotions have, you know, become more admitted and prevalent in how we work with students these days. You know, there's been a bit of an emotional or social turn away from looking at learners only as cognitive beings. But we believe more work has to be done. Maybe it was also because of, you know, COVID and the stresses that came because of the pandemic that we have become more mindful of the importance of well-being of our students and also of our staff. So while there is more research with quite a bit of attention to emotion in the learning journey, there isn't really much yet on emotion and failure, and that is where we want to kind of kick in and do a bit of work there, because we believe that this is an emotion that accompanies us, you know, through all stages of a researcher's development, from the early stages of the doctoral candidate to, you know, the becoming academic, the early career researchers who suffer from a lot of anxiety and stress because of, in a lot of cases, they still have to prove themselves to get tenure. It depends a bit on the context, but there's a lot of stress on them. And we also heard the stories from CEO, you know, that these pressures and the feeling of, oh, I'm just not good enough, I can't get it together, they can continue throughout the career, and they happen also to more established researchers. Now, interestingly, our team has now been working together, it's 2023, since 2020. So that's when we started putting our thoughts together. And also we started applying for research funding, which another failure we haven't received yet. But please, everybody, keep fingers crossed for this year's round, because hopefully we are successful this year. Last year we were a close miss. I think we were in the top 10% of rejected research fundings from that scheme. So we're going again. We're also not giving up. What you can see here on the slide is that basically around the same time that our team started thinking about failure and doctoral education, there was also a number of articles published in that journal of qualitative methods that also said that negative health challenges, failure, etc., are not being talked about, often masked, ignored, and that there seems to be a bit of a dominant discourse of only emphasizing the successes of an academic, but not really talk that much about how you get there, how you get to these successes. So that's, again, a starting point for us. And these are the questions that we ask in our project. We want to understand, actually it should be, how do academics means here, candidates and researchers, you know, who work at universities. How do we go about these situations, and what can we do to support and scaffold, support the stakeholders and scaffold the experience, so that maybe the experience is not quite as devastating as it's often experienced now. Okay, I'll move on and present a second angle. And here I introduce my colleague, Associate Professor Vijay Kumar at the University of Otago in New Zealand. And he did a bit of work on the juxtaposition of success and failure. So Vijay is also deeply engaged in doctoral education, but he also was for a time director of the Learning and Teaching Center at Otago. And, you know, we talk a lot about success story of students, but he actually tried to juxtapose success with failure. And then we also became aware that what we objectively experience as success and subjectively experienced as success or failure can be very different things. So objective failure might be something like the example that I shared at the beginning. I submit a manuscript and I get the assessment, reject or resubmit or whatever, or maybe I apply for promotion and I don't get it in the first round. And again, these things happen much more often than a lot of people think. On a more subjective level, there might be other thought that we have when we think about, as an academic, that we are failing. It could be that we think, oh, no one, is interested in my idea. I cannot make a significant contribution to the field, which actually reflects very much on my sense of self-efficacy. Like in my story, that is, in hindsight, I guess, what happened to me at the time. I thought, if I cannot make a contribution in, now that I'm in New Zealand and Australia to the field, what am I doing here? So to me, that feeling was really the one that was subjectively hurting and that I was struggling through. Objectively, it was because the manuscript had been rejected. So we're looking at this juxtaposition here, and we want to understand a little bit more the subjective side of things. We are aware of what happens at the objective end, because the objective failures or successes, they are basically part and parcel of our KPIs, key performance indicators, expectation standards for academics. I'm not familiar with the language here, but I'm pretty sure that you have measures in place that measure whether academics are successful. And of course, the success of a doctoral student comes with the examination reports. Okay, we believe that failure throughout the academic career is part and parcel of the process, and that we should work towards normalizing it because of its potential for personal growth instead of just putting it under the carpet. A quick word also on the imposter syndrome, because when we started thinking about the topic, sometimes we got questions, oh, isn't that the imposter syndrome that you're talking about or that you're exploring? It's definitely very, very closely related. But the main difference is that the imposter syndrome is defined as the fear of failing. So it's that fear of failing. You think, well, I'm not good enough, I shouldn't be here, I shouldn't do a PhD, or I shouldn't be a professor or whatever. And there is quite some research there in that space. Seems to be coming quite a bit from the United States, and also with a focus on gender. And that's interesting, but what we want to look at is really digging deeper into the lived experience of failure. So not just the fear that people might have or maybe not have, but actually talking about exploring what happens when it happens, how do people go about this, etc. And from there, of course, through that understanding, then develop way forwards, and I'll come to that at the end. The next slide, I'm sure you will enjoy it. This is the area where Professor Jen Webb makes a huge contribution. So Jen is, if you don't know Jen is fantastic, like all my team members. Jen is a creative artist. She is a poet, she's a writer. She also holds 2 PhDs, I think one in accounting and one in creative arts. And she's also currently the dean of our graduate research office. So you can see she has a lot to offer. And for her failure in her creative part of Jen, failure is just much more accepted than in academia. So she put here together a few quotations from writers, and just take your pick which one you like best. I like the first one very much, especially how it finishes. Ever fail, no matter, try again, fail better. So having that little quotation there, last time that I applied for research funding, actually for this project, and I got the second time a near miss, I thought that's exactly what we're doing. We're failing better than the first time, because the first time we were pretty much at the bottom of the applicants. Okay, so it seems as if in the creative arts, failure is much more accepted. It's kind of how creative people see themselves, but they seem to also talk more willingly about it than maybe academics do. For an artist, the work is never finished. If it was finished, it's not creative anymore. Basically, we believe that this understanding of that nothing is ever finished. And I think listening to Asipe's story at the beginning, a lot of doctoral students, they think once they submit their thesis for examination, it's finished. And it's finished for a little while, but no, even if you get only minor revisions, you're still working with it. And of course, that work basically is just the starting point for what you might do in your life after the PhD, and you take it further. Later on, you will realize that things that you wrote maybe 10 years ago or 20 years ago, maybe you don't like them anymore, but that was the work that you produced at the time. And of course, you continue because it's never finished. So stretching yourself, working beyond your current expertise, this is what research is about. This is what doctoral research is about. This is what any research is about. And we would probably like supervisors, examiners, adopt this flexible approach more when they actually work with students, and of course also get students more aware of that non-finished nature of research and also the doctoral research, so that students are willing to take risks. And the story that we heard from Melvin, you know, doing something different, taking a list, of course, it should be supported, because otherwise, how can we ever, as Jen puts it here, come up with something new and marvelous? If we only do what we know already, that is not research, of course. Okay, moving on. Last but not least, there is Rachel, who works also at Newcastle Uni with Alison. Rachel has a particular interest on failure in what we call diverse or diversity groups. And despite, of course, many efforts that the Australian government and the Department of Education, so I'm referring to the Australian context, has done, we still have a significant underrepresentation of so-called government-ascribed equity groups in doctoral programs. Gender, financial background, cultural and linguistic identity. So thinking here also, you know, speakers of English as a second language, but also other linguistic identities, and also geographic location, whether you're in the city or in the countryside, all these things matter. And I'm pretty sure that you can relate to that also in the context here. So we also, we want to use that lens and understanding in our project, because one of the goals would be to increase the representation of those groups in the long term. Okay, so yes, I think I've already said that. Yeah, okay. Now, to sum up, because I'd like to have at least a little bit of time for a few comments at the end. So as I said at the beginning, this is work in progress. And what we have done so far is really looked at failure from different angles. In a nutshell, it's an area that is under-researched. In academia in general, there are some pockets of research coming up. Doctoral research hasn't really been looked at in that context, but we believe that trying to understand and investigate failure is legitimate, because remember at the beginning I said that failure or perceived failure at some stage, perceived comes with costs. So there's the financial costs. So that is something that governments find interesting. So when I apply for government funding, I need to, of course, emphasize the financial costs that come with candidates having to, enroll another 6 months. It's not only the costs for the candidates, but also, there has to be more supervision provided, space has to be provided. So there are real costs. But there's also the emotional costs. Each story that I have so far collected and heard about when failure happens at the moment of initial doctoral education is heartbreaking for the student, but also for the supervisory team, because the supervisory team, they are often a mix of early career researchers and more established researchers. Usually it comes to a shock to all of them, because they also then start again doubting themselves. Have I done the right thing, in my supervision? Am I to blame for the failure of the student, etc.? So by collecting stories, interpreting stories, analyzing stories of failure, we want to understand the phenomenon better, with the explicit goal to then also develop and also trial strategies for more successful communication around failure. Because, and this takes us back to the very beginning when I asked you to take your stories, we believe that breaking the silence around this topic is an important step so that learning can take place. All stories of failure come at some stage, not all, maybe not all, but many stories of failure, let's say, come at some stage with the realization of what good came out of that. And we would like to promote that and work in that space a little bit more. So as I mentioned before, here's another little snippet of failure. So we've applied for funding from the Australian Research Council, and I'm leading this team. And as I said, we've now put in an application for the 3rd time to get funding for this work. Last time we failed better than the first time. So we're hoping that this year will be successful. But one thing that we have already learned through the failures, if you like, of the last 2 years, we believe that our work is important. So we are disseminating our work, just like you are kindly listening to me this afternoon. But we also, we are, what I presented today, we are putting together as a conceptual paper on failure, which we want to share with broader audience, because we believe it's of interest to, not only people in education, but all academics. And we have started very specific papers. So one paper that is about to be submitted is on what we call discursive constructions of failure and thesis examination reports. So Alison's team in Newcastle, they have a stock of examination reports, which we can use for this project. So we're looking at those, I think it's 15 out of 500 reports where the examiner has given a resubmit. And we're looking at how failure is constructed in these reports. Yeah, very happy to share that paper as soon as it becomes available. So we're going to continue this journey about failure with or without money, hopefully with money later on. But for now, we believe it's important to have that conversation and develop theory around this phenomenon. Basically, what we have realized is that there are pockets of, how we can look at failure, but there's no theoretical construct or anything that might be useful for our future work. All right, and here are some references. And now I'd like to stop sharing and maybe get a few thoughts from you. Any thoughts are welcome. Otherwise, my guiding question would be what you take away from this 1 hour, this afternoon. And while I'm, yeah, all right. Any thoughts? What's your main, any take home message or any questions to me? We have like almost 10 minutes left, so we have a little bit of time to share ideas. What do you think? Do you think our team is doing something interesting, or do you find this all maybe a little bizarre? Grant?
Good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Great. Thank you very much for sharing, Professor. This is a topic which is actually of great interest to me. Just for the record, I'm a doctoral candidate at Rhodes University. Yes, I'm very interested in the topic of failure, and especially also the impacts on the emotional side of things and on identity, scholarly identity in this context. And I just wanted to share a couple of thoughts. In my experience of the doctoral journey so far, it's becoming apparent to me that it feels like doctoral study is less and less about a test of intelligence, but it's really a test of tenacity and determination and grit, because of course the intellectual facets are put to the test to some degree, but I think it's really just clawing one's way through the periods of darkness and uncertainty and confusion and sometimes sadness that really, I think, sometimes sets the quote unquote failures apart from the successes. It's really just having the grit to continue when it seems there's no point in continuing, and it's really a test of character, I think, before it is of intelligence. The other point I wanted to make is that I think it's useful for me to begin to just reorientate myself to the notion of failure, because I think failure actually needs to be applauded, because there would be no failure if one wasn't attempting to traverse new territory or try something new, or have the courage to attempt a bold new path that's unexplored. So in attempting to do something new and embracing the courage that comes along with that, failure can only happen there, as opposed to remaining in one's comfort zone where nothing new is attempted and no new territory is explored. But then again, there's no failure, but no success either, really. So I think to fail means that you've embraced the boldness to do something new, and that in itself is worthy of recognition.
Yeah, beautifully said, Grant. That's, yeah, so I guess once we can develop a more positive attitude towards failure, we can become, as you say, more bold. We can become more risk takers. And I think this is what researchers should be like. It's not about ticking the boxes and becoming good craftsmen or craftswomen on, how to shape a PhD thesis, but it's really that boldness which can come with, maybe it doesn't work, but then maybe it works the next time. So that it was also interesting. So before I came to Rhodes, a couple of weeks ago, I was at Stellenbosch Uni, and I chatted and also gave similar paper here when Liesel Frick was there, who was hosting me there, and we also discussed very closely the close connection between failure and creativity, which Liesel Frick looks at in the doctoral education space, not as a poet or artist. And we can also see close connections there, because if you want to be creative in your doctoral work, it comes with a risk, and that might lead to temporary failure. So that's, again, an avenue that I think we should probably look at more often instead of running away from it. Yeah. Thanks.
Just one further quick point, if I may. I'm reminded of the quote by Thomas Edison, who said, "I have never failed. I've just discovered 10,000 ways not to build a light bulb."
All right, that's a nice one. Yeah, I'll keep that in. I'll put that down as another maybe stimulus for discussion. Thanks, Grant. Anyone else who would like to maybe make a comment, ask a question, share a story? share what maybe they take home as a take-home message. Imagine you're sitting at dinner tonight, probably with candlelight because it's romantic, and your partner asks you, so what did you do today? And you say, there was a seminar, and maybe there was something that you took home. Maybe you could try to write a one-liner into the chat of what you are taking home from today's seminar in terms of, you're thinking about failure in research. Any thoughts? Have you become more courageous in maybe looking at failure? Thanks, Kirsten. That's a nice one. I'll read it out. I don't know, can everybody see the check? If you don't fail at some point, you're probably not doing it right. Maybe, yes. Always smooth sailing is not really what a researcher's career is about. Anyone else? A comment, a final comment? Chipu, like yours? Failing does not mean that I'm dull. Yes, because that's what we feel like. It's just a temporary setback. Failure is part of learning. Geranda, if you want to do a PhD, you move on for sure. You just know that now, maybe now you know even more that there will be setbacks, and that's just part and parcel of the process. And maybe we should also say, of course, the feeling of the experience of failure is hard. And talking about it is also hard, especially when you're in the middle of it. I think it becomes easier after time. But there will also be many beautiful moments of successes and achievements, which insights, in whatever we research, which will keep us going as researchers. And that's exactly what we need. Yeah, thanks, Theo. As you were saying, maybe we should share our shadow CV more often. Tweet out when you get a rejection and not when you get a publication. There was an article I don't remember, I think it was on a blog actually, of a doctoral blog. There's one professor of the at the University in Sydney who has put on one wall in his office, I think it's a he printed out the letters of rejections that he has received, not only for articles, but also for grant funding, because it's so competitive to receive external funding. And he has put all these things in a transparent way on a wall, and that is his shadow CV, not the successes, but all the failures. And of course, a lot of good books are written about that too, of successful business people. If you think Steve Jobs or others, they often write about their failures. Oh, that was Nick Hopwood. Yes, thank you. Thanks you. Yeah, he advertises sharing the shadow CV. Very important. And I guess this is part of maybe this movement. All right. Well, it's 4:00. I thank you all for your contributions and your time this afternoon. Hopefully, I can meet you in person next week for the next seminar. And in the meantime, also, as Asipa was saying, I'm around for another 2 weeks. Very happy to meet, have a chat, yeah, just, share thoughts and ideas about doctoral research in general or in particular. Very happy to meet more. And I hand back to Asipa now.
Thank you so much, Elke, for that presentation and engagement. And it's quite actually great to listen to you speak about the importance and the lessons of failure, especially in this doctoral journey that many of us are actually embarking on, which has so many hiccups that sometimes actually causes one to want to give up. So we are not giving up. And in the chats, there's been a lot of conversation about not giving up. We will go through the journey with its ups and downs. Thank you very much. Colleagues and friends, next week we are meeting again. So there's going to be a hybrid conversation, at least because I've received so many requests when I was saying it's only physical. They were like, can we get it hybrid? I'm going to speak to Elke about it. But you'll see on the communication, if there's a link, you can join. But for now, we're going to be having it physically at Rhodes. The venue will be communicated with you via the mailing list. I've noted those that have requested for me to add them to the mailing list, and I will do so as soon as I can. The conversation next week is on how to deal with feedback. So there's going to be a lot of conversation on feedback, how to receive feedback, and also for those who are sending feedback. So please make sure that as an academic, as a supervisor, as a postdoc, as a researcher, do attend this workshop, which is going to be hands-on, as I hear from Elke, on feedback. Colleagues, do enjoy the rest of your Thursday and also enjoy the rest of your weekend. Be on a lookout on my emails tomorrow, as I'll be sending out all the recordings that are required. Thank you so much, Elke, again for this. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure. Thank you. Bye-bye, everyone. Hope to see you all again, either on the screen or in the real life.